One of my favorite thought experiments is the weather machine. The basic idea is you build a black box device with cameras, microphones, and other sensors that is designed to study the weather around it, interpret that data, and spit out an analysis. It's also capable of basic learning and memory, so as to improve its abilities, and pattern recognition, so it can roughly estimate what future conditions could arise. Since you now have a machine capable of perceiving the world around it, interpreting what its senses tell it, organizing that information, and coming to independent conclusions, does it exhibit consciousness? In other words, is the weather machine alive? This is the classic conundrum of artificial intelligence. At what point does programming become thinking? This puzzle has evolved over the years, from the simple Turing test, in which true intelligence is defined merely by whether or not a reasonable human could be fooled by it, to more modern so-called reverse Turing tests, like the Swirsky test or the CAPTCHA systems that were all the rage a decade ago. Nowadays, with both the Turing test and the CAPTCHA system easily beaten by the proliferance of things like deep learning chatbots and AI art, the philosophical question of artificial intelligence is more pressing than ever, though many experts refute that these are quote-unquote true AI, arguing instead that they are more akin to mimicry or puppeteering. Of course, the question of difference between a puppet and a person is even older than computers, going back at least to Pinocchio, or even as far back as Ovid's Pygmalion. Obviously, metaphysical questions about sentience, consciousness, spirit, or the qualia of life are a bit too far off topic, even for me. But fiction's fascination with where we draw the line between a lump of flesh and a human being has always been with us. In the 1980s, with the first fully computer-literate generation just getting out of its infancy, this was a surprisingly common trope in movies, and today, I want to talk about the first movie I can remember that got me questioning whether a machine could ever be a person.
They would have you murdered. All you'll ever be.
What's your name, son?
My name is Daryl.
The Richardsons have just taken in their first foster child, an amnesiac young boy by the name of Daryl. He turns out to be a perfect kid, highly intelligent, quick to learn, capable of empathy, and prodigious in anything he tries. All in all, he's a little too perfect, and after he is found by his creators, he remembers that he is a highly sophisticated government project, a data-analyzing robot youth lifeform. However, the government wants him destroyed, while all Daryl wants is to get back to the family and friends he has grown to love.
As I've mentioned before on this channel, it's difficult to overstate how massive an influence E.T. had on movies. And among the piles of scripts that executives thought could capitalize on Spielberg's blockbuster formula was D.A.R.Y.L, written by British writer David Ambrose, Scottish writer, producer, and whiskey baron Alan Scott, and somebody named Jeffrey Ellis. This script languished in the early stages of development during a shakeup at Paramount Pictures, though the studio did recommit to the project in late 1984, under the stewardship of famed film financier John Heyman, who helped shepherd the project as a co-production between America and Great Britain. To direct D.A.R.Y.L, they hired Australia's own Simon Windsor, known at the time for Harlequin, but later famous for movies such as Free Willy, The Phantom, and Quigley Down Under. Hoping to mirror the modest successes of movies like Cloak and Dagger and War Games, i.e. tech-savvy espionage fantasies that starred children, the project was greenlit with a budget of around $10 million. Today's episode was voted for by my patrons. Go on over to my Patreon page and show me some support to get early access to videos, bonus content, and more. A special shout out goes to my $8 patrons: Batty Bat Firebrand, Chuck Poor, Diane McGill Davis, Giffen Chumley, John Burrell, Mike O'Connor, Numinous 2019, Robert McGill, Scott Johnner, Sean Vale, Spoats, TB Schramek, I hope I pronounced that right, and Warren Davis. And to my other patrons and channel members as well. Thank you for making this channel possible. And now back to the show. To play the titular Daryl, they turned to Barrett Oliver, fresh off his work on The Never-Ending Story and the original Frankenweenie. Oliver would win a Saturn Award for Daryl, but he would quit acting at the end of the decade to pursue a career in photography. As a child actor, Oliver shows a lot of range in what could easily have been a disastrously wooden performance, and since the story relies on audiences sympathizing with Daryl, his is arguably the most important performance.
I've taken you from a family that loved you.
You gave me everything, too. You made me what I am.
Daryl's foster father, Andy, is played by Lenny himself, Michael McKean, whose comedic chops helped to humanize a character that could have come across as overbearing or unsympathetic.
You're a genius. In 4 weeks' time, you're my secret weapon.
The warrior!
We're gonna murder them! Yes?
However, the real heart of the Richardson family is Joyce, the mother figure played by Mary Beth Hurt, a 3-time Tony nominee who was best known to filmgoers at the time for The World According to Garp. Daryl's other pseudo-parents are Dr. Stewart, played by Joseph Summer, and Dr. Lamb, played by Catherine Walker.
General, the machine becomes human when you can't tell the difference anymore.
As for the Foxes, Andy and Joyce's neighbors, they are played by Steve Ryan and Colleen Camp, with their children played by Danny Corkle and Square Pegs' Amy Linker.
Who's Hooky? My sister, Sherry Lee. Hooky? Amateur hooker. She dates every night. I just invented the name. It really pisses her off.
Filming began in January of 1985, with most of the location shooting done in my hometown, Orlando, Florida. Notable places include Cayley Elementary School, the Orlando VA Hospital, Delaney Park, the Great Oaks Village Foster Home, the East-West Expressway and Coastal Highway, the Kissimmee Gateway Airport, and finally, backstage at Walt Disney's Epcot Center. This would prove to be the first of many motion pictures shot in Orlando, and I vaguely remember it being a big deal at the time, although truth be told I was only 6. Outside of a few scenery shots filmed in North Carolina, the rest of the film was shot at Pinewood Studios outside of London. A real SR-71 Blackbird was used for this sequence, although if you know anything about it, you should know it would not be left fully fueled. If I might digress for a second, there is a common myth that the Blackbird was designed to leak fuel. But this isn't exactly true. Because the fuel tanks were built directly into the airframe, the panels holding them together would wear down due to the massive temperature changes during flight, and special sealant would have to be applied on a regular basis. So yes, it did leak fuel, which is one of the reasons why only 32 were ever built, but that was more a result of wear and tear. However, the SR-71 did use a significant amount of fuel and couldn't launch with full tanks, which is why it would usually be refueled in mid-flight. There's very little about Daryl's Blackbird flight that is realistic, but this movie got me and my brothers interested in the thing, so that's a net positive. Getting back to the movie, there was a strict information blackout on the set, and subsequent marketing for Daryl relied heavily on a sense of mystery about what the movie was about or what the title's acronym could mean. According to the always reliable IMDb trivia page, and yes, that was sarcasm, there was even a gimmick where if you went to certain theaters and correctly guessed what Daryl stands for, they would give you a mini poster as a prize. However, I can find absolutely no corroborating evidence that this actually happened. Shocking, I know. But hey, if you happen to remember it, sound off in the comments. D.A.R.Y.L released in June of 1985 in North America and Great Britain. to middling reviews that were critical of the film's increasingly ludicrous second half, but generally positive about the more personal first half. Unfortunately, it failed to gain much traction with audiences, only turning in a total of $7.8 million at the box office. As far as I can tell, it didn't do particularly great on home video either, and the movie disappeared into relative obscurity, overshadowed by the likes of Flight of the Navigator and The Goonies. However, it does belong in the conversation as an early prototype of a modern trope where robot children are used to explore humanity, as seen in Kubrick and Spielberg's AI, and most recently, in the highly underappreciated anime series Pluto, which you can find on Netflix. If you like Pluto, you can listen to me and my Australian buddy Lynn break it down episode by episode on our podcast, The Streaming HEAP, available wherever you get your podcasts. Though it does have many familiar trappings of 80s family sci-fi fantasy, D.A.R.Y.L has aged pretty well, and might be worthy of a critical reevaluation. There was a bizarre-sounding sitcom in the works a few years ago that dealt with a grown-up, obsolete Daryl, but since I can't find anything about it more recent than 2020, I'm guessing it never got off the ground. So in case it isn't obvious by now, I am quite fond of D.A.R.Y.L, but I acknowledge my biases as a child of the 80s who first heard about the movie because it was being filmed just down the road from me. It is true that the movie gets more and more ridiculous as it goes, with the entire Blackbird sequence standing out as particularly silly, and it does suffer from feeling too similar to a lot of more well-known movies from that era. Still, it has a lot of heart, and deals with some heavy subject matter in a new way. Even setting aside the metaphysical questions about artificial intelligence or what it means to be a human, as a parent watching it now, I find myself relating to the Richardsons, who take in this kid and do their best to care for him, only to realize that he's way more special than your average child. They feel useless and superfluous, with the only time their fears seem to quiet down being the moment D.A.R.Y.L lashes out at them,
Kiss my ass.
After his new best friend Turtle explains that he has to make mistakes from time to time. Even though the story doesn't seem to give them a lot of breathing room, it's obvious the Richardsons and the Foxes grow to love D.A.R.Y.L, and that D.A.R.Y.L grows to love them. And if you're not moved by the moment when D.A.R.Y.L has to say goodbye, I question whether you're a robot. On the subject of real-life artificial intelligence, I personally believe it won't happen overnight. It will be a gradual process, with everybody insisting it's not happening until it becomes blindingly obvious we've created something that has a real mind of its own. I just hope, when it happens, if it hasn't already, it's less like Skynet and more like D.A.R.Y.L. And that's all for today, my fellow Earthlings. What's your favorite robotic Pinocchio story? Let me know in the comments, and while you're there, don't forget to hit those like and subscribe buttons. Thank you for watching, and until next time, when we'll start off Guilty Pleasures Month with a giant but pious-looking bug, this is the Unapologetic Geek, telling you to never be ashamed of what you love, as long as you're not hurting anybody.
What is a hooker?